The sun was scorching overhead as my friends and I arrived at Camp Green Haven, our eagerly anticipated summer escape. Nestled deep within the woods, this remote camp had a reputation for adventure and fun. Little did we know that the forest held secrets far more chilling than we could ever imagine. The first few days were a whirlwind of excitement, swimming in the clear lake, competing in archery contests, and sharing ghost stories around the campfire. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, strange things began to unfold. One evening, as we gathered around the campfire, our counselor, Sarah, shared a tale about an abandoned cabin deep in the woods. "They say it's haunted," she whispered with a mischievous grin, sending shivers down our spines. "Who's brave enough to visit it tomorrow night?" Curiosity got the better of me, and I volunteered along with my friends, Alex and Lisa. The following evening, armed with flashlights, we ventured into the dark woods, guided only by the moonlight filtering through the dense canopy. The air grew thick with an eerie silence as we approached the cabin. The cabin stood before us, its windows shattered, and its wooden facade worn by time and neglect. It looked more decrepit than haunted. We cautiously entered, our flashlights revealing dusty furniture covered in white sheets, untouched for years. As we explored further, a chill ran down my spine. In one corner, we discovered a collection of old photographs, each featuring campers who had stayed here decades ago. Strangely, they all had the same terrified expression, their eyes wide with fear. We couldn't explain it, but we felt an inexplicable sense of dread. Alex and Lisa insisted we leave, but curiosity kept me lingering just a moment longer. That's when I saw it, a faded diary hidden beneath a pile of old books. I picked it up and began to read. The diary belonged to a camper named Emily, who had stayed at the cabin in the summer of 1975. She wrote about strange occurrences at night, whispers in the dark, and shadows moving on their own. Emily's last entry sent a shiver down my spine. "They come for us when the moon is full." Suddenly, the room grew cold, and a shadowy figure appeared in the corner of my eye. I turned to see a ghostly girl, her hollow eyes locking onto mine. She whispered, "They're here." Panic surged through me as I rushed to join Alex and Lisa, who were already fleeing the cabin. As we stumbled through the woods in terror, the night seemed to come alive with strange sounds, whispers, distant laughter, and the chilling echoes of footsteps behind us. We reached our campsite, breathless and trembling, but the horror was far from over. Over the next few nights, the ghostly apparitions grew more relentless. Emily's spirit appeared to me each night, begging for help and warning that the others were coming. My friends were tormented by their own spectral encounters, voices whispering their names and shadowy figures watching from the trees. We turned to Sarah, our counselor, for help, but she dismissed our claims as overactive imaginations. However, when she entered the cabin herself one night, she emerged pale and shaken, refusing to speak of what she had seen. Desperate for answers, we delved into camp archives and discovered a forgotten legend. Camp Green Haven had been built upon ancient Native American burial grounds, and every decade during the full moon, vengeful spirits would rise seeking retribution. Realizing that we had to put an end to this nightmare, we gathered all the campers by the lake on the night of the full moon. Armed with the knowledge from Emily's diary, we chanted ancient prayers and lit a ceremonial fire to appease the restless spirits. The air grew thick with tension as we waited, and then, slowly, the whispers faded, and the apparitions receded into the darkness. As dawn broke, the forest was silent once more. Our nightmare had come to an end, but the memories of that summer camp would haunt us forever. Camp Green Haven, with its pristine lake and sunlit days, had revealed a dark secret, one that we would carry with us, a chilling tale of summer horrors hidden beneath the facade of a perfect getaway. The house had always felt spacious, warm, and inviting, but tonight it felt different. She was alone, and every creak of the floorboards and whisper of the wind seemed to take on a sinister tone. It was the kind of night when your own shadow can startle you. Her parents had gone to visit her grandmother, who lived hours away, and she had decided to stay home for some much-needed alone time. After all, she was a young woman, and it was high time she faced her irrational fears head-on. Armed with movies, snacks, and her dog Max, she was ready to conquer her unease. The evening started out uneventfully. She made popcorn, selected a few cheesy rom-coms, and settled into the living room with Max curled up at her feet. The familiar laughter from the TV provided a comforting background noise. She was doing just fine, or so she thought. As she reached the end of the first movie, Max suddenly stirred. His ears perked up, and he gazed toward the hallway, growling softly. She shushed him, thinking he had probably heard a passing car or an animal outside, but his growl grew more intense, his hackles raised. It was then that she heard it, a faint scratching sound, like nails on wood, coming from the hallway closet. Unease washed over her as she got up and approached the closet cautiously. Her hand trembled as she turned the knob, and the door creaked open. To her relief, there was nothing inside but coats and old shoes. She chuckled at her own paranoia and decided that her nerves were just playing tricks on her. Back in the living room, she picked another movie and settled down, determined not to let fear get the best of her. But then, Max started growling again, only this time he wasn't looking at the closet. He was staring at the ceiling above the couch, his eyes locked onto a single spot. She followed his gaze and froze in terror. Above the couch there was a small rectangular attic door she had never noticed before. It was slowly opening, revealing only darkness beyond. Her heart pounded as she watched, unable to tear her eyes away. Max's growls turned into frantic barks, and he jumped onto the couch, trying to reach the attic door. But as he did, something emerged from the darkness, a long, bony hand with fingers that seemed to stretch on forever. It reached down and grabbed Max by the collar, pulling him into the attic with a yelp. She screamed and rushed forward, but it was too late. The attic door slammed shut, leaving her in eerie silence. Panic coursed through her as she grabbed a chair and climbed up, her trembling hands fumbling with the attic door latch. When it finally swung open, she was met with nothing but darkness. Fueled by desperation and fear, she climbed into the attic, armed only with a flashlight. The space was cramped, filled with dusty old boxes and forgotten relics of the past. As she crawled deeper, she heard Max whimpering, his sounds echoing from a distant corner. With every step, the atmosphere grew colder, and the shadows seemed to come alive. And then she saw it, a figure hunched and emaciated, hovering over Max, who lay paralyzed on the floor. Its eyes, devoid of humanity, locked onto hers, and it whispered in a voice that chilled her to the bone. "I've been waiting for you." With Max in her arms, she turned and fled the attic, slamming the door shut behind her. Her parents returned the next day to find her huddled on the living room floor, Max trembling beside her. She tried to tell them what had happened, but the attic door was locked, and they insisted it was just a bad dream. Years have passed, and she no longer lives in that house, but she can never forget that night. She still sees those eyes in her nightmares, and she knows that whatever lurked in the attic was very real. Sometimes, when she's home alone, she can't help but wonder if it's still waiting for her, hidden in the shadows, waiting for its next chance to emerge. Working the night shift at a funeral home was a job like no other. The stillness of the night, broken only by the faint hum of the building's cooling system, always sent shivers down Joe's spine. But he had grown accustomed to it over the years, finding solace in the quiet, until one night when things took a sinister turn. Joe's duties were simple: prepare bodies for viewing, assist with embalming, and ensure everything was in order for the following day's services. He was used to the somber atmosphere, but what he couldn't get used to were the occasional eerie occurrences that defied explanation. One chilly autumn night, as Joe was meticulously adjusting the floral arrangements in the viewing room, he heard faint whispers coming from the hallway. He froze, convinced he was alone in the building. The whispers grew louder, and he strained to make out the words, whispers of grief and despair. They seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, as if the very building mourned with the departed. Shaken but determined to dismiss it as his imagination, Joe continued his work. Hours passed, and the whispers ceased, but an unsettling feeling lingered. As he made his way to the embalming room, he noticed a faint putrid odor that sent bile rising in his throat. When he entered the embalming room, the source of the stench became apparent. The body on the table, that of an elderly woman, was bloated and discolored in a way that defied natural decomposition. Joe's heart raced as he realized that something was terribly wrong. He had embalmed her just 2 days prior, and there was no logical reason for her body to have deteriorated so rapidly. Desperate to make sense of it, Joe carefully examined the body, searching for signs of decomposition. It was then that he noticed it, the faintest movement of the woman's eyelids, a twitch of her fingers. She was alive! Panicking, Joe rushed to call 911, explaining the horrifying situation. The paramedics arrived swiftly, their shock mirroring Joe's as they examined the still-living woman on the embalming table. She was rushed to the hospital, her condition critical but stable. As the chaos unfolded, Joe was left to grapple with the inexplicable. How had he made such a grave mistake? How had he failed to confirm the woman's death? The questions gnawed at him, and he couldn't escape the guilt that threatened to consume him. In the days that followed, the funeral home was thrust into a whirlwind of investigations and lawsuits. The woman, miraculously still clinging to life, claimed to have experienced a form of living death that doctors struggled to explain. Joe was suspended pending an internal inquiry, and his once steady world crumbled. Haunted by guilt and uncertainty, Joe couldn't shake the feeling that he had been visited by something otherworldly that night, a presence that had whispered from the shadows and orchestrated the bizarre chain of events. He questioned his own sanity, wondering if the funeral home held a dark secret beyond the realm of the living. Ultimately, the truth remained elusive, and Joe's career was shattered. The funeral home's reputation was forever tarnished, and the woman he had mistakenly prepared for burial was left with an eerie tale of her own. As Joe left the building for the last time, he couldn't help but glance back at the shadowy entrance. The night shift had become a terrifying ordeal, and he was left with the chilling uncertainty that some mysteries are better left buried.